The American kettlebell swing versus the Russian kettlebell swing. Which is better? Which is worse? The debate ends here. Hi, I'm Shane Heins, Director of Fitness Education for Onnit, here to walk you through the differences between the American kettlebell swing and the Russian kettlebell swing, which one you should use, and how to maximize their benefits. First, let's break down the names. It's fair to say that the father of modern kettlebell training, who initially revitalized its use in the West and essentially planted the seed for its popularization around the world, is Pavel Tsatsouline, and he's a Russian. The number one kettlebell movement that really took off out of that was the swing. It was the introduction of using a weighted implement through a dynamic pendulum-based range of motion. Coming to approximately waist height became the accepted range for what became known as the standard kettlebell swing. It was accessible to most, and it helped prioritize a big hole in most people's fitness: power generation, driven by our posterior chain and hips. Now, along the way, other variations of the swing were being explored, and one in particular, due to the enthusiasm and expansion of CrossFit, leapt out above all the others. That was the swing whose apex ended overhead. With the rise of this variation came a need to quickly and easily differentiate between it and the standard kettlebell swing. Well, that standard swing was popularized by the Russian guy, whose main program was literally named the Russian Kettlebell Challenge. So it made sense that the standard swing became called the Russian Kettlebell Swing. And seeing as it was in America that modern kettlebell training proliferated to the rest of the world, and it was a primarily American movement culture that was utilizing the overhead variation, it only made sense to define the new swing as the American kettlebell swing. Without much surprise, debate and controversy ensued about which was better and which was worse, which was more safe and which was more effective. But if you look at it, they are essentially the same foundational movement, a dynamic hinge with explosive hip drive to propel the kettlebell. All that really changes is where the upward swing of the kettlebell ends and where its descent then starts. And you want to know what the real irony in trying to create this differentiation of name and movement is? Pavel Tsatsouline also taught the overhead American swing version in his early programs when modern kettlebell training was just kicking off, the Russian. So you've got great benefits with both, thinking about what kind of shoulder range do you have, how strongly are you able to maintain your body's structural integration, what weights that you're using. Russian kettlebell, you can get heavier. American, you'll probably go a little lighter. And just thinking about your whys and your goals. What am I trying to get out of this? Not simply trying to do the one that is supposed to be the best. Think about your goals, why, understand how you're going to do it, and which variation is right for you. First, let's take at the Russian kettlebell swing because it is essentially the foundation for both it and the American kettlebell swing. What we're going to do is we're going to address first and foremost what we do in the middle of the movement, and that is the triangle. Essentially, if you were to take your feet out a little bit wider than hip width apart, and we were to look at our two knees, draw a line across the knee, and then draw two lines from our knees up into our groin, we have a triangle. This is going to be the space or the pocket that your hands and the kettlebell, to a degree, are going to travel through. So when I'm doing a swing, I have a hold of the kettlebell. When I come down, my hands are staying high in the triangle. They're not dropping down to the bottom of the triangle or below it. They stay high, thereby keeping the kettlebell up high and close as well. Number two, we're going to look at the ends of the kettlebell's movement. First is going to be the loaded end. So when we load, we are essentially loading through the hamstrings and the glutes in that posterior chain, stabilizing through our back with the kettlebell. When the kettlebell comes through high in the triangle, the force of the kettlebell is going to pull back, and we want it to. We're not going to stop it short. Let it travel. As it does so, it starts to elastically load everything that's going to give you all of your power generation. Now, what often happens is the momentum of the kettlebell can start to cause us to roll our shoulders, bend in our back, or even our head starting to look down. What I want you guys to do is think about pulling in the opposite direction of the kettlebell as if you were traveling from the kettlebell up through your spine to the top of your head. Imagine if you had a mohawk too, and you were to grab a hold of that mohawk and pull, you're going to get long through the spine. The head is not looking down, and the head is not looking up. Think eyes out through the top of your head, 10 feet in front, long through the spine. This will create a strong structural integration to make sure the load from the force of the kettlebell moving isn't hurting you, and you're getting stronger as a result. That's one end. When you come up to the other end, what we're doing is we're utilizing the drive of the hips to move the kettlebell. So I'm not using my arms or my shoulders. It's all the drive through the hips, and the end of the kettlebell is going to pull or tug you forward. So what you're going to do is you're going to pull back slightly on that kettlebell to help counter that, so that when you're at the top position, again, from your feet, through your knees, through your hips, through your chest, shoulders, and head, nice long line, as if you're standing in front of a wall, not bent out here trying to counter the weight. Let's talk about that now as we get to our third point, which is the hip drive. When you are in that loaded position, everything is activated and you're in a strong structural position, you're going to drive through the earth. You're going to start to push through the earth with your feet, and you're going to drive your hips up. It's not drive your hips forward, drive your hips up and forward. So rather than thinking about trying to get your hips, and as if you have a battering ram in your hips, and you're driving that battering ram forward, bear with me, it is actually more about this tilt in the pelvis. So it's a tuck. I'm driving up and I tuck the pelvis under. Rather than keep my booty back, tuck the pelvis under and drive the hips slightly. This creates a strong line of activation all the way up the body so that I am essentially in that front of that wall. Nice strong position. Like I'm doing a plank on the floor. Same principle. That helps control the kettlebell in the front end. From there, we now have our middle, our ends, and the hip drive to move in between back and forth to get that kettlebell swing. Now our fourth and final point is the start. A common start for the kettlebell swing is the hike, and it is a good start. The purpose of the hike, which is from here, like you're hiking a football, right? Hike, hike, and you hut the football in behind you. The purpose of the hike is to give an anchor point and help folks sit back to feel that activation of their hamstrings and glutes. That's not a bad thing. What ends up tripping up a lot of folks is that because it's down so low, when they start, the swing ends up happening low below the knees or low below your triangle, which is the optimal space we want to be traveling through. So to hike sets up initially through that posterior chain, but too low, and then creates this funky cycle that we start seeing a lot of people getting into and losing the rhythm and timing of what a good kettlebell swing looks like. So there's nothing wrong with actually starting from a full standing position, because where are my hands in the kettlebell? They're here at the top of the triangle, high in the triangle. So from here, what I can start to do is I can go low, just start, nice and easy. I'm still maintaining all the same principles, grounded through my feet, pushing back through my hips, long through the spine, hinging, generating that power from the posterior chain, and slowly but surely generating more and more and more power until I'm swinging full on. So, it's not that the hike is bad, it has a great purpose to it. If you can go from the hike, pop up high in the triangle, and then get into your rhythm, rock and roll. If you're having difficulty with that, there's absolutely nothing wrong with starting right here. And that is how you do a strong, effective, efficient Russian kettlebell swing. Sometimes you don't feel focused and alert in the gym, and your workout can suffer as a result. The new Alpha Brain pre-workout was designed specifically for athletes and gym goers and supports focus, power, and endurance. It's the ultimate way to charge up your mind and body. Use the coupon code GETONNIT to get 10% off Alpha Brain pre-workout at onnit.com. Now, let's get back to the video. Now for the American kettlebell swing, which again is simply an overhead variation of the swing that we've already done. So all the same principles apply. So we're just gonna pick up where we left off. The kettlebell has swung out to between waist or chest height. That is the standard. Now what happens is, for it to become the overhead variation, the kettlebell needs enough power to continue to travel and break that line. This is one of the benefits and views of utilizing the American kettlebell swing. Well, if I have to generate more power to try and get the kettlebell up. And yes, to a degree, because it needs a little extra oomph to break the line of parallel. Except that there's so much force being generated when you get effective at this, that the kettlebell is traveling out. All you're really doing is redirecting that force up and out. So, generating enough force to break the line. Once it gets past the line of parallel, the kettlebell is actually pretty weightless throughout. So it's a lot less work. Here, there's a lot more fatigue that starts going in because the pause that I have, the rest that I get, is shorter. Whereas when I go here, it's floating. So I have a lot more rest in the top and going down. The key to doing this safely is, what is your overhead range like? Your overhead range of motion and the ability to create stability over top, because we're not pressing from a stable platform, we're swinging into that position, will determine whether this is right for you or not, and whether you can do so safely. So when we're doing this, up overhead is strong, stable arms. I can do this to a point where I can actually control and hold the kettlebell overhead. If you can do this, you know you have control over the bell. It's a bigger drop as you come down, but all the same principles apply. Where there will start to be a breakdown, if you don't have quite the range overhead available to you, where a lot of us will start to break is in the ribs. So we'll actually start to break in the ribs and lose the pelvis. And all of that force overhead from the kettlebell driving down through our body starts to overcompensate and create a distribution of force through the body that isn't always great for us. Oftentimes it isn't. We do a lot more optimally when we tuck that pelvis under and draw those ribs down. This supports that overhead force much better, and you're much less likely to get injured as a result. So for the American kettlebell swing, it's what is your overhead range of motion like, and the ability to control that long line from your feet, through your knees, through your hips, through your pelvis, your ribs, shoulders, and your head and your arms. Just the same as we are here in the Russian kettlebell swing, our body is in front of a wall. We're just extending it with the American kettlebell swing, where now our body is still in front of a wall, all in one line. Those are your two keys: overhead range of motion, control of pelvis and ribs. That is your American kettlebell swing. So what are the benefits of a Russian versus American kettlebell swing? A standard swing where the kettlebell comes up to parallel to the ground, or going up overhead. For the Russian kettlebell swing, the benefits are you can actually work with much heavier weight. So all of that idea around producing a lot more power, developing hypertrophy and muscular strength and power generation through your posterior chain, you can do that safely with a Russian kettlebell swing because the heavier it is, you can really work on getting that kettlebell up while maintaining all of the other structural cues. Whereas trying to get heavier and heavier and heavier with an American kettlebell swing starts getting more iffy because of trying to maintain stability through your shoulders and the safety of having a massive weight over your head that you may or may not be able to control. So big power generation for the Russian kettlebell swing. For the American kettlebell swing, it really starts to amplify working on full structural integration, full body, and helping support opening up greater range of motion overhead, where one really creates a lot more development through the lower half of our body, posterior chain-wise, while still stabilizing upper body. I'm not saying it's not getting the back. As you start going through up into the overhead position, you are having to pay attention to your scapula and your back muscles, your lats, control of those muscles and tissues, especially on the way down. Because of the much larger arc that the kettlebell travels through, it will have a much higher tendency and propensity to pull you out of position. So you really have to work to control that and hold the line as the kettlebell comes through and out. So it's not a matter of better or worse. It's simply a matter of why, how, and if. Why you're using a particular variation, how you're performing it, and if it's right for you. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos. And for a full article on the American kettlebell swing versus the Russian kettlebell swing, see the link in the description below. And до свидания. If you want a quick warm-up to prepare for your kettlebell swings, click on the video right here.